Stop at the store to come into houses to smite. How easily would you comply with these instructions that Moses was giving?
Well, I personally think it wasn't that hard for them to do because back then people would already kill to eat. So it was already part of their ritual, daily stuff. And I guess it wasn't a hard thing that God was asking for them to do. It was pretty easy for me. I believe that was it.
So unlike us, where we don't see any of that, we just go to HEB and we just buy it all that's already done. We don't have to do any of that work. It's something that they're a little bit more comfortable with, taking an animal and killing it, because that was how they lived. Okay?
But I still think that it was hard, like, seeing the animal die, because, that was, like, a remembrance of us sinning, like, that's what our sin causes death.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, I do see how it would be a little hard to do it, but I think they were used to it.
You think they were used to taking a basin and keeping the blood and putting it with a brush, and not a brush, but a branch, and putting it on their house? Not that part, yeah. That would be a little bit different, a little bit odd.
I think they've seen all of these plagues that have taken place right before all of this. And so Moses is saying, look, this is the day we get to go. And so they would be ready to go.
All right. So they were to keep the Passover so that they could live. If they didn't keep it, if they didn't do it, then, and the blood wasn't there on their door, then they were going to be smitten. They were going to be killed like the Egyptians and the Egyptians' animals.
I think it was normal to kill to eat back then, but maybe not to keep it like in your house for 14 days. So that might have been the hard part, like having it, it's almost like a pet at that point. I see it every day in the house.
For 4 days.
4 days.
4?
10 to 14.
They picked it up on the 10th. We picked out that it was 4 days.
Oh, 4 days.
Yeah, from day 10 to day 14.
We always thought the kids would fall in love with us, having a little lamb.
Yeah.
That'd be hard to slaughter.
Yeah.
Well, don't you have some little chicks at home right now,
Yeah.
Jeff?
Girls are always in there, yeah. Handling them.
What's that?
They're always there, like handling them every day, so.
Yeah. Do they like them? Do they think they're cute or anything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a little bit of a personal connection. Brother Jerry has told us many times about, taking this and keeping it and bringing it in as a part, of the household. And, everybody getting to know this lamb a little bit and maybe develop a relationship. It's kind of funny to say, but it's true. We develop relationships with animals, and so creating this, connection.
One other lesson to learn, I think, from it is that today we need to follow the rules of God, same as they had to follow them then. If we reject God's law today, well, we're the same as the Egyptians here. We're rejecting His eternal life, basically.
Do you think that there were any children of Israel who said,
Well, there had to be. I mean, think of the context, right? Like, this is Israel who's been in slavery all these years. All of a sudden comes Moses. And like Sherry said, they've seen the plagues, like, oh, this stuff is going on to the Egyptians, but, you know, nothing's really happening to us right now. But at the same time, now it's like, hey, bring this lamb in your house on the 10th day, and then on the 14th day, you're going to consume it. You're going to first, you know, kill it so you can get its blood, and then with that blood, I want you to put it on your doorpost. You have to, you know, as a human being. You know, of course, this is God's instruction. He's instructing Moses to give this to the people. As Brother Jerry said, you know, this is what the Lord instructed. But the Lord instructs us to do all kinds of things nowadays. It's still live for Him, but don't we question it sometimes, or don't we kind of get like, I don't know. There had to be some type of doubt. Like, you mean to tell me if I put blood on the post of my door that I'm not going to die? Like, how does that make sense? You know, like Israel at this time was, of course, this is far from the time of Joseph, where, you know, they knew who their God was. But you have to put yourself in their shoes. I've been a slave, but my God is real. I've been a slave this whole time. If He's real, how come He hasn't freed me? There's all kinds of variables that we have to take into account as humans. Because I'm pretty sure that nobody was safe if they weren't, you know, didn't have this token on their door. The Lord didn't say, I'm just going to kill the Egyptians. He said, anybody who doesn't have this blood upon their post will die tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also, like, when you come to the Lord, like, you're troubled and things are crazy, and He tells you how you're going to live. And you take such confidence in that. You feel like the Lord's really talked to you, and you're dedicated to do something that doesn't make sense to no one.
Mm-hmm.
That God, of all pieces of this project, He's going to instill that in everyone's heart. Like, you're not doing something crazy, you're doing something for me. Okay.
To answer your question, you said if we think that it hit anybody in Israel. On Exodus chapter 11, verse 4 onward, it says, Then Moses said, Thus says the Lord, About midnight I will go into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits in the throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals. Then there shall be a great cry throughout the land of Egypt, and such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again. But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue, against man or beast, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. So nobody died from Israel's side, not even an animal.
A dog didn't move his tongue.
No one quarreled.
Thinking about what Nate was saying there, keeping the laws. What if today we look at the Ten Commandments and we say, well, I'm just going to keep 5 of them. I think that's sufficient. It would have been like these people saying, well, I'm going to put the blood on the left doorpost, but that ought to be enough. I won't put it on the upper doorpost or the right one. We can't go halfway.
Follow the instructions. All right, number 2.
When David explained this observance to their children, Exodus 12:25 to 27. And it came to pass when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as He hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when He smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped.
So it's interesting how, you know, at the at the time that this is occurring, as if it's not enough, the weight of the situation, the gravity of the situation, the drama, the chaos, everything that's about to go on here, he's talking about, like in verse 14, this is something you're going to do forever. You're going to continue to do this later on. And then the instructions here, it's like, I'm going to, as I'm giving you these instructions and as this stuff is about to occur, as it's about to happen and everything, you're going to remember this. You're going to remember this. You're going to remember this. It's something that you can't forget. It's something that you instruct your children about. When they ask, why are we having this lamb? Why are we doing this? And the whole, as they call it, the Passover Seder, the entire process that they have created, for this dinner, for this Passover meal and everything. When they say, "What is this about?" then you'll tell them. It's the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. The lamb was sacrificed, and the blood of that lamb was used for the identification of us that we were passed over, we were saved. This great destruction happened.
This is a great victory for the people of Israel, who had Egypt, of course, at this time was a powerhouse. Like, they were the nation. And Israel didn't have an army. Israel didn't have any type of military structure or government or leadership other than the priests. They were stuck. You're our slaves, and the Lord delivered them. He delivered them with Moses and Aaron, right? Of course, by the Lord's strength. But these two men led this nation, and the Lord wanted them to remember that. Like, I have saved you. I have delivered you. I have brought you out of captivity. And I want you to remember this day. In the scripture, he ends verse 12 saying, "I am the Lord," right? You will know who I am. You will know my name. And he's reminding his people, he wants them to remember every year that I have saved you. I have delivered you because of, you're my people. You're the chosen people. But the Lord, of course, the instructions of the intricacies of what they were to do to perform this ceremony, this act of the Passover. But he wanted to remind them that on this night I delivered you from this nation. I have saved you.
When all the odds were against you, when there was, I wouldn't even say there's not even hope. There's not even a thought of trying to escape or get out of slavery or whatever. So, yeah. And I did this great, great act.
Today, Israelites still keep the Passover, but I found out that it's not the same as I thought they were. We follow God's word, do it the way they're supposed to. My youngest daughter married into a Jewish family, and they keep Passover the way they do it in that family. The oldest person leads it, but everybody reads part of the verses and they go around and eat the bitter herbs and stuff. And they don't do the live piece of like a lamb or something. And they don't burn it, but stuff over or anything like that. But they also eat pork, and they also don't keep Sabbath. And they're not Jewish to me at all when they don't keep it. They are. When you talk to them, they're definitely a Jewish family. But I said, how could, when she told me she was dating, and I said, well, at least they'll help you keep Sabbath. She said, no, they don't keep Sabbath at all. So no. And I said, well, you won't have to be tempted eating, because she doesn't eat anyway. But they eat seafood, all the unclean, shellfish, everything is their favorite meal. So I just don't understand Jewishness.
Well, there's all kinds of different, just like within Christianity, there's all kinds of different degrees of conservatism and liberalism, right? There's Jews that, even today, I'm sure absolutely, follow everything to the T.
Still walk less than a mile.
Yeah, they're doing everything that they can according to not just the Mosaic Law, but the Talmud and all these other things. And then you've got others that are they're just kind of that in name, right? It's almost like being a Christian in name, but not really just doing what you want to do.
It was an education for me, because
Yeah.
did not know. I thought if you were Jewish, you kept the laws.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I had a patient before, he was Jewish, and he thought keeping those are ridiculous, like the Sabbath and the food and all the stuff. But he said that he's definitely Jewish, but he's not keeping any of those.
All right.
And I was just shocked.
Yeah. Hmm. There used to be a Jewish bookstore here on Callahan and Fredericksburg Road, and I would go over there sometimes to see what books they had and stuff. And one time I talked to the store owner, and I asked him what they were doing for the Passover, and he said, "Well, we have our own little thing that we do, and we go to the river somewhere, and we walk out into the river, and we take our pockets out of our pants, and we walk around in the river and let the impurities and the hidden things and everything wash away." And okay, that's in Deuteronomy where? That's in Exodus where? It's like, it's just symbolic. It's a token of humans. I mean, we start to think, and when we start to think, God has created us in His image with the ability to think, the ability to use logic, but when we start to think and take ourselves and usurp the commandments of God and the Word of God and begin to rationalize things and make plans and say things, so we're going to do it this way and God will be okay with it. When we start to do those things, it's like, no. But whether you're Jew or Gentile, or heathen or Christian or whatever, you got that flesh, and you start to use that noggin to think of things that are, sometimes we look at it and say, that's crazy. It is what it is. Number 3, kind of an emphasis on what we've been talking about here.
Was this the only time they were to observe the ordinance? Exodus 12:24. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. But not eternity. Forever here meant as long as you needed it. After Jesus come, did away with this, and the service stopped.
Yeah, I remember a study one time about the definition of forever versus like the definition or concept of eternity and everything. And I think it might have been you, Brother Jerry, I think it was back in the days of the cassette tapes. He had made a study on it was on a cassette tape, and I remember listening to that in the Datsun B210 back and forth to work, but yet forever always had kind of an end date in it when it was used. And they were supposed to teach it to their sons, teach it to their kids, and let them continue to pass that on down. Number 4. So Sister Marilyn read the first part of what happened at midnight earlier in 11:4 through 6. So 12:29.
And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. All the firstborn.
Any social classes excluded from this? From the firstborn of Pharaoh that sits upon his throne, even to the firstborn and the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of beasts.
I'm just kind of curious as why the animals, too.
Good question.
I don't know. That stands out to me. I could could see the people getting murdered, but why like that?
I think I see, personally, I think I see it because in chapter 13 it says that the firstborn, whoever opens the womb, is his everything, including the animals, it all belongs to him. So I think that's why the animals came into the picture, because everything is made by God and everything belongs, every living being belongs to him.
And I think in our everyday life, like we were talking about earlier, about the grocery store situation, in our everyday life, I mean, it wasn't like it was then, right? Animals were a critical component of everyday life, all day, every day. Animals were there, to help with work. Animals were there to help, bear burdens and do things. There weren't cars, there weren't trucks, there weren't vehicles. Animals were there for a food source, and you raised them, and you had them so that you could sustain yourself and live. And so, they're several steps removed from our lives today, but then it was an integrated component. It was an important part. So not only did the Egyptians lose their workforce, human resources, but they also lost a workforce and a food resource, with these animals. And so it was a double hit to them. I can't imagine just the enormity and gravity and pain and sorrow and agony of the situation, right?
Which makes more sense than when he tells them to go and loot all of them, that all of them were willing to give up everything. Like they were giving them everything, whatever, just get out.
Just go.
But I always thought it was kind of strange that they would loot them and but that makes more sense that if every household had someone that died, they'd be ready for those people to go.
Right. Yeah. Not just the Pharaoh, not just the Pharaoh's leaders, not just the higher ups, but everybody's impacted by this. And so everybody is ready for them to go.
Even the animals are ready for them to go.
Yeah, the animals. Yeah.
Well, it says that the cry in Egypt was going to be one that had never been heard, one that will never be heard again.
Yeah.
This is the Lord's instructions.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord is not slack on his promises and on his word. So you said you can only imagine the sounds from the Israelites to hear as they're sitting there waiting of the pain and the agony that's going on. The Lord, when he casts judgment upon, nobody's safe.
Right.
Whether it be man or whether it be his own creation, the Lord is absolute. And if he says he's going to take the firstborn, he will take the firstborn. And nobody was going to, there was going to be no exceptions to that rule or to his decree.
And when things happen, when things occur, traumatic events occur, bad things happen, a lot of times people are like, well, wonder why that happened, or how did that occur? And then, the NTSB is going to go do an in-depth study on, what failed, and they're going to go look at the black box, and they're going to go, right? And in this case, everybody knew what was going on. And it was so decisive, it was so clear that the reason why this happened is because these people got to go. It's their God, it's them, and, they need to leave. Yesterday.
If I lost my firstborn, I think if they stayed, they might take my second one.
Right.
They take my third one.
Right. It's been escalating, right?
Yeah.
Those plagues.
All these plagues have been around, the darkness they were in for 3 days.
Yeah.
All this stuff before. I don't know about it.
I've thought of that before. If you had your firstborn and they had a child, then both of them are going to die. Because they both have a postborn.
A child and a grandchild. Yeah.
Well, it could be your spouse too. They could be your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Sister Marilyn?
So I want to point something out, and I have a question. So, whenever I read this whole thing about the Passover, on chapter 13, verse 9, it says, well, I'll start from 8. And you shall tell your sons in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. So, whenever I first read this, I connected this to Christ's Passover. You know how he says to keep the Passover?
Mm-hmm.
In memorial of him. So, this reminds me of, you know how the blood of the lamb saved them?
Yep.
But now Christ is our sacrificial lamb, right?
Right.
So, like you said, this is a token that is with importance. I started to think, could this be the seal of God? You know how God's seal people will not be touched when the things that happen in Revelation come to us.
Right.
So I started to ask myself, you know, can the Passover that we are to keep in memorial of Christ every year,
Right.
can this be the seal of God for us? And also, why does it say on verse 6 of chapter 13 that 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord? Why does it have to be 7 days where you can't even have leaven in your house?
Because God said so.
Because God says
7 days.
I always ask myself why.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started
Yeah.
to think about that in Revelations too, but
Yeah.
I wonder if there's connection.
I'm sure that there is. The number 7 is also, you know, just a general, frequently occurring number with the Lord. So, you know, happens to be a week. But yeah, we know that the Holy Spirit is a seal, right? It seals us and spiritually. But what you're talking about here, maybe Sister Marilyn, is a kind of a physical sign, a physical seal.
Apparently, they didn't have the unleavened bread before the very first Passover. That was the second, wasn't it?
Right. I think
They didn't start observing the unleavened bread part until.
The second year. Because like, at the time it happened, they picked up their dough that was
not leaven.
to be rising. And then, so the next year, they implemented the whole unleavened bread for 7 days.
Because they weren't going to be hanging out for the next 6 days of that time period, right? Right.
But it ended up becoming unleavened because they picked it up and took it with them. They have time to rise.
Oh yeah, it says it on chapter 12, verse 39. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt. For it was not leavened because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. So yeah, it was until the following year.
It was going to be their food. It was going to be their... Quite a production.
Right.
Number 5, I think we've already read that verse in Exodus 12:11. How prepared and ready were the Israelites to be when they ate the Passover? Ready to go, ready to move, prepared to make it happen.
So that means for us today, we have to be ready at all times, because we don't know when the Lord's coming. So we have to continue to be ready.
And I think to your point, the note says Israel was forewarned and given a time of deliverance. We have been forewarned, but like Jesus, we do not know the day or the hour. What were you going to say, Sherry?
I was just gonna say that, there's the scripture of that, it's like, it's fading out of my head, but like whenever you're in distress, it says God always makes a way for escape.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the lesson out of all this really is that the Lord's gonna give you the way to get out. You don't have to figure it out. He's going to prepare it, and he's going to tell you what to do. And if you're listening and you obey, then it'll happen.
Number 6.
How are we to prepare for Christ's return? Mark 13:34-37. It says, this is what Christ said. It is like a man going to a far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch, therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming. In the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. So basically, be ready.
Shoes on, clothes on, shoes on the feet. Watch. There's something to think about in that, to the point of the note, that they knew that tonight's the night. Tonight is the night. All right, it's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen this evening. This is the day. It all is going to start to take place, tonight. We don't have the luxury of knowing that day or that time. We don't have the luxury of saying, it's 2 years from now, it's 3 years from now, it's 20 years from now, it's 200 years from now. Don't worry, it's not yet. Joseph?
What I think is interesting is that for the strong definition for watch is to keep awake.
To keep awake?
To be vigilant, wake, be watchful. So I think it's not just like, making sure you're right. It's like more be awake in your spirit as well. Not just, I wonder when it's gonna come. You're also like keeping your faith fresh, per se. You're keeping it awake, not like getting to habits. So you just
Lazy.
Yeah, you just go through the motions. You're like, whatever. I'm a Christian. You don't like keep it with the vigilant.
A little bit of a sense, an idea of urgency about the preparedness.
We can't know that day, otherwise we'd be crippled as believers, right? This time, you said Israelites knew we're leaving tonight. If the Lord told us, Brother Tim, I'm coming back next Saturday, or 3 years from now Saturday.
Right.
So in your head, I got 3 years, I can do whatever I want. And then when it comes time closer, then I'll get ready for you. Then I'll come back to you. The note even distinctly says, but like Jesus,
Right.
he doesn't even know.
Right.
And yes, the Lord gives us these signs. We read about the signs of the times and what is to come. But as children of God, we read these signs and we know what's coming. Why though? So we know to be ready. Sometimes people take these signs way too seriously though, right? They delve deep into it, so they want to narrow it down. Jesus is coming back this year. He's coming back this time, this year. Every year you hear that, don't you? He's coming back this year. And even the Lord doesn't know. Why? Because even if Jesus knew, we'd be praying to Jesus like, tell me when you're coming back, tell me when you're coming back. And the Lord doesn't want that. He wants us to serve him unconditionally. He wants us to live for him every single day. Be ready. Living for him every day is the equivalent to having our shoes on, having our staff in our hand, having the clothes on our back, and we're ready to rock and roll whenever he does come back.
Right.
But if we had a date, it'd be pointless, because we'd be sinning up until the Lord knows us. We'd be sinning up until that point. Just like every year, right, for the Lord's Supper, right? Every year. Right when it comes time for Lord's Supper, the house gets packed. And the Lord knows us as humans. And we can't know the day, and his son doesn't even know the day he needs to return.
There's so many verses in Daniel that warn us of so many more false prophets that are going to tell you these days. Try and tell, I know this as a fact, it's going to happen now and then. As soon as you hear them say that, then you know that those
I find it very sad though that, like, we as Christians, yes, we know the signs, and if God wills and we live through those times, like, thank God that we know the signs and we will know the time is already here, which is already here, you know, because that's what the apostles would say, the time is here, you know, the time is today, watch, you know. But I find it very sad how everybody is like sleeping spiritually, not knowing that this time might never come because we might die today.
Right.
So we're waiting for these signs, we're waiting for this time to come, but the day is today, because today might be the day you are called up. So we should live with that sense of urgency, like brother said, because today might be the day that, you know, it's your last day for you.
Right.
So
Yeah, either the return of the Lord or your death. Either of those two are
the end of you.
it's the end game. Yep.
Same time.
Yep.
That's when the door of Noah closes for you. The
Yeah.
grace.
The door on the ship.
Mhm.
Number 7.
After all the firstborn died, how did Pharaoh and the Egyptians react? Find this in Exodus 12, 33-36. Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, Rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes and their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. So how did Pharaoh and the Egyptians react? It specifies that there was not a house where there was not one dead in the land of Egypt. So it starts off saying, basically everybody in the land of Egypt and the Egyptians, somebody died in their household. Because, you know, there's bound to be a firstborn anywhere in those houses, whether they had kids or whether even those people that lived there were firstborn. But of course Pharaoh calls them up, and he just said, go, leave. And but not just to leave, he said, serve the Lord, as you have said, because this whole time, you know, back and forth is my God is greater than, my gods are greater than your God, right? So he made emphasis of serve your Lord. He's like, take your cattle, but then he ends that verse with, and bless me also.
Yeah.
Because he was hurting, right? You know, his son just died. So if Pharaoh's feeling this way, you got to know his people were feeling that way, because that's what the next verses talk about. So that they were urgent upon the people. They get them out, make haste. They got to go. Otherwise, and said, what did it say? For they said, we're dead men.
Right.
As our sister Gina and others alluded to earlier in their comments, where they had to be, we're next. If our firstborn were, then we have to be next. It talks about the Israelites taking their dough before it was leavened, as we discussed earlier. And then it talks about how, the word that they use is borrowed, but or lent these things. They spoiled the Egyptians. But the Lord made, what did it say, that the Lord gave people, the people favor on the side of the Egyptians. Not favor in the sense was, oh, I'm happy you're here, I'm glad you're here, more in the sense of, they basically, they were broken down to
Right.
where there was not gonna be any quarrel or any questions as to, you know, here, take this and
Right.
go. You know, there wasn't gonna be any type of argument with it. So they spoiled
Mhm.
these Egyptians, and we can ask, well, why are they taking their jewels? You know, they just wanted their freedom, but you know, once they leave, they had to have some form of trade. They had to have some form of substance to, when they got to their promised land that they were supposed to get to, they had to have some type of, you know, valuables as opposed, you know, to dealing with other nations, or not just that, but for them as well. You know, in order to be a powerful nation, you had to have monetary value. So same
I
thing at
think
that time.
that the people also, just like Pharaoh did, asked Moses for a blessing. These people saw them as blessed. They are blessed people because all this stuff has happened to us and not them.
Right.
So that the Lord gave the people favor, I think means that they saw that the Israelites were blessed.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like a token. They were all about, the Egyptians were all about all these different gods. That they wanted to, like, okay, give into this and give me a blessing. Here, take this. When you want this, well, here, take this.
Right.
You know, like, they wanted to get that blessing
Mhm.
from these blessed people.
Not out of respect though, out of fear.
Sure.
Out of straight out of fear.
Yeah.
They, like they said, we dead, we're next.
But at the, sorry, Pastor,
Mhm.
at the same time, whenever I first read it, I felt bad for the Egyptians, but when I read the whole story, like, the Egyptians had initially killed the firstborns of Israel before that, and Israel didn't do anything about it. So God took vengeance. He showed his people that he is the God of vengeance, that vengeance belongs to him.
Mhm.
So he took their firstborns.
Right.
And people don't really say the whole story when they say this. As well, like, the Egyptians did serve them 400 years as slaves.
Right.
So basically what they took for them was little compared to what they basically, I
years.
believe they deserved.
Mhm.
You know, so,
Yeah.
like, if we see the whole story, it's not
Mhm.
that bad as we see it
Yeah.
initially.
Unless you were alive then. Yeah.
It's crazy how Israel saved them, Joseph saved them from being wiped off the earth.
Right.
And in return, what did they give them? They gave them
Right.
slavery for that.
Mhm. Joseph, you have online?
Well, not on
Okay.
my question. So it says, and Pharaoh rose up in the night. So my question is, how does he know to wake up, right? And everyone, it says, and all his servants and all the Egyptians, all of a sudden, this must have been God, right, asking, or like, putting on their heart to wake up. Because like,
They may be crying.
Yeah.
Yeah, verse 30 says,
Maybe he woke up to it.
there was a great cry in Egypt.
but the thing is that it says, and Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt. So there's a great cry in Egypt because everyone woke up and saw it. Because I like
His
seeing
wife
like,
came running in and goes, our son, our son.
Or maybe somebody wasn't asleep when they should have, and they saw their loved one die, and that's how the whole
Right.
thing started. Maybe we don't know exactly
Right.
what happened.
Yeah, it could be too. I mean, to Joseph's point, but what do they talk about all the time? Everybody's got that parental instinct. Sometimes you just wake up, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Then that too, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, let me make sure everything's okay in the house and do your walk around the house.
Why is everybody crying?
Or when the destroyer passed by, maybe the feeling, like, you know.
Yeah, that oppressive
Yeah.
feeling. Yep. Yep. But he didn't wait. He didn't wait till I'm going to go talk to those guys in the morning, right?
That night.
He was like, go get them
And
now.
it could have been the Passover angel made a noise,
Right. Yep.
you know, a big wind or something.
Mhm.
also it says there was not a house where there was not one dead.
Right.
But I'm like, wouldn't there be a house where there was no firstborn? Like how is that?
You're playing the numbers.
Somebody's gotta be a
Yeah.
firstborn, it can't not be a firstborn.
But like, what if it's just a husband and wife and they're all
One of them
they're
will
all
be
the
a
youngest.
firstborn,
The last
right?
kids.
No, if they're all the youngest, they're the youngest of their family. It's just
Their
the
dog
one.
that was laying in bed with them.
Their cow.
Something has to be.
Something died.
firstborn in there. It says there's not one, not a house where there was not one there.
Mhm.
So some, one
I guess
poor
they're
animal was
Yeah,
dead, so they're gonna go out there and be like, ew. Like,
yeah.
It was one of the mice in the wall.
they find that months later probably.
Can you imagine getting rid of that many cattle? I mean, that's a lot.
It's a big pile outside the city. So
That's
that
It,
animal.
in of itself, its own plague. But I'm glad that Marilyn brought out the first, because they had killed a lot of Israelites and hadn't remembered that, and so, yeah, that would be as
And they were in slavery in the beginning, under
sure.
Joseph's time, that Pharaoh honored, gave him the best land, gave him good land, but it was after the Pharaoh died, and people didn't know.
30 years after,
Yeah.
because they were in total 430 years, but as slaves 400, so that means only 30 years at peace with them.
They had prosperity,
And
and then, but they were captive.
yeah, 30 years to have procreated and he's been, I mean, because they were becoming numerous. That's why the Pharaoh was like that. So in 30 years, they really did procreate a lot of them.
Blessed.
Yes.
And you know, in that single family house, like Joseph referring to there, one of those, the husband and wife there could have been a firstborn. And not
Well,
that they
even
had
if
to have a
You
firstborn.
live by yourself, you probably live next door or several doors down from your parents, and your mom comes running over and says, "Your dad just died," you know.
Yes, I
Someone
guess it depends on the definition of house.
house,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like an actual building or like how the church is where it's
Yeah.
not really the building, but people.
Everybody knew.
What are others' thoughts on the slavery in Egypt and building the pyramids? I often thought they were intelligent people that they could
Map it out.
design stuff, how you move those big stones, you know, without tools and stuff, and how they carved it and cut. But I don't know if, I've heard different theories, whether the Egyptians built the tubes of pyramids or, I don't know.
You know, I was actually studying that the other day, and I read somewhere here, I could find you the verse, where the slaves of the Egyptians would make out of blocks or bricks out of
Yeah,
certain
the water.
clay and straw. So they would, I'm pretty sure, carve it out the shape that they would like, you know?
Manual labor.
Yeah,
They-
the
the-
manual
Yeah, the
labor.
Israelites did that, but whether they used their intellect to design it or not, you know, I don't know. That's
You
what-
would think that they would have to have figured out a way to make it a little bit less horrible.
I don't know, they might be all like, hey, I see you're
Well,
trying
I
to
mean,
change the
even if
system.
I'm a slave, I know that if I
They took away
put-
their straws and you still have to make as many bricks, but we're not gonna give you the wax, whatever you need to make the brick, we're gonna keep that from you.
You know, I always wondered, you know how Joseph, whenever the famine came on Egypt for 7 years, you know how it says that they would store the supply in cities, like they would have special cities and storage places for this grain? I always thought, like, I could be wrong, right? But the pyramids are perfectly built
To store it
to
in.
store stuff. So I always thought, what if that originated with Joseph? You know, that idea of making stuff like that to store. Maybe later they could have used it to bury their dead or whatever they wanted that to be used for.
Yeah,
But
history we're taught in school that it was made to honor the Pharaoh, whatever man was dying, that they built while he was alive, put his body in when he did die.
Mhm.
But that makes sense though, if it's made to hold the great.
It does make sense.
I always thought that could be a possibility.
I always thought how much spice they'd have in these Susan. You're gonna have so much spice eating this grain.
Okay,
These are mine, but, yeah.
question 8. Sorry about that little break there.
Well, you know, back to what Marilyn was saying about, they had there's 10 of these plagues. So they already had 9 chances to get themselves straight. And they wouldn't do it. So the Lord had to keep bringing more severe and severe
Right.
on them in order to,
More and
so
more
to speak,
personal.
wake them up.
Mhm. Mhm. They rationalized everything else away, and even though they were severe, they were nothing as personal as what happened with this final escalation.
But it was at some point towards the end that he made Pharaoh's heart hard. Because God was like, you know, buddy, 6 times you haven't done it, and the 7th time I said, but now, from here on out, you're getting the rest of them.
Okay, number 8.
Did Israel keep the Passover in the wilderness of Sinai? Numbers 9, 1-5. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the 1st month of the 2nd year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Let the children of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight ye shall keep it as its appointed time, according to all its rites and ceremonies ye shall keep it. So Moses told the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the 1st month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So the children of Israel did. Yes, they did. Keep the reunion.
How long had it been since the first one?
1 year.
Second year.
The first month, the 2nd year after they were come out of the land of Egypt. So we see here, just as God had instructed them in Exodus, they're executing this memorial, continuing to do it. Do you think at a certain point it became kind of a mixed remembrance? As in, we know that not long after they get into the wilderness, not long after they're out there, what do they start to do? Complain, murmur, we were better off there, this is no fun, this is bad, we don't have anything to eat, we don't have anything to drink.
Well, I'm sure it stirred up old memories for sure. And for every household, there would be a little bit of a different story.
Yeah. Number 9.
Passover observed under Joshua 5, verses 2 through 10. At that time, the Lord said unto Joshua, Make thee sharp knives, and circumcise again the children of Israel the 2nd time. Joshua made him sharp knives, and circumcised the children of Israel at the heel of their foreskins. And this is the cause why Joshua did circumcise all the people that came out of Egypt that were males, even all the men of war, died in the wilderness by the way, after they came out of Egypt. Now all the people that came out were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness by the way, as they came forth out of Egypt, them had they not circumcised. But the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people that were men of war, which came out of Egypt, were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord. And to whom the Lord sware that he would not show them the land, which the Lord sware unto their fathers that he would give us, a land that floweth with milk and honey. And the children whom he raised up in their stead, them Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not circumcised them by the way. And it came to pass that they had done the circumcising all the people. When they had done the circumcising all the people, that they abode in their places in the camp, for they were whole. And the Lord said unto Joshua, This day have I rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you. Wherefore the name of the place is called Gilgal unto this day. And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal, and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at Even in the plains of Jericho. So was the Passover observed by Joshua? Yes. Of course, before they did, they had to come with this covenant of circumcision, because they had been in the wilderness 40 years. We just talked about was there mixed reactions Passover. By this time, you have to believe it had been, maybe the reasoning behind it had been diluted a little bit because those that witnessed it, those that were there, had gone on. And now it was those that were born in the wilderness, those that weren't part of the Exodus, that weren't in part of that slavery. So Joshua had to circumcise them as what the Lord had instructed. But when they were done, of course, they kept the Passover. The Passover still continuing to be kept. And we know Joshua, the type of man that he was, very devout and very strong man. He served the Lord without question. But yeah, because of, it's basically like a new generation type thing. You know,
Right.
they had to go through this process before they could partake of the Passover.
And how long it had been now?
What was it, 40 years?
Over 40 years. Still doing it. Joseph?
You can see how in the last verse how important it was to them, because it says, "And the children of Israel came to Gilgal, kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, even in the plains of Jericho." Before it would say of the first month, but now it's of the month. It's so important that that month is like signified as like the month of the year. It's the most important.
So still executing it, still doing it as commanded. Number 10.
But you know, this one also was the last one that they took before going into the promised land. And they didn't take it they didn't get manna anymore from that time forward.
Once they entered the promised land.
Changing of the guard, like,
Number 10 says, "What did Jesus celebrate before he was betrayed in the garden?" Matthew 26:17-21. It says, "Now on the first day of the feast of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, 'Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?' And he said, 'Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When evening had come, he sat with the 12. Now as they were eating, he said, 'As surely as I say, one of you will betray me.' And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, 'Lord, is it I?' He answered and said, 'He who dipped his hand with me in this dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he would not have been born.'" Oh, sorry, I went too far.
Just zealous in it, yeah. Okay. So what did Jesus celebrate before he was betrayed in the garden?
The Passover.
He had intentionally made his way from the north country down, to Jerusalem. Had been, in and out of Jerusalem for a few days, staying in Bethany and going into the temple in Jerusalem during the day, and then going back to Bethany. And as the time comes here, they ask him, "What do you want us to do?" He gave them instructions, and they followed it. And in the evening, he sat down with the 12 and ate the Passover.
The Lord honored his heritage, where he was from, still being with his disciples who were, Jews, these men of Israel. The Lord couldn't not do it, right? Like if he skipped it, we always that disciple, they remind, hey, we have Passover,
Right.
The Lord honoring his heritage. But like Brother Jerry said in the last question, this was the last Passover before they entered the promised land. This is the last Passover before the Lord instituted a new what's the word I use? I don't want to say event, but
Yeah.
Season.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about.
right.
The this was the last one, but the Lord, again, not being, or being of his heritage, was going to partake of this as well with his disciples.
And I find it very interesting how they prepared him, just like they prepared the lamb in Exodus. Because in verse 12 it says, "For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial."
Right.
So he was basically prepared, his body was prepared already for that great sacrificial lamb
Right.
sacrifice to be done.
This is a these are key verses as far as us as members of the Church of God, of how we come upon our Lord's Supper day as well. Because we read in the beginning of the lesson, it was the 14th day of the first month. And we see that even up until the time of Jesus Christ, that they still kept this ritual.
Right.
So we know that, we'll study the Lord's Supper next week, but as far as when we come upon the day, we go by the same thing, because the Lord kept the Passover, which was still on the 14th day of the first month.
Right.
I have a question. You know how in the Old Testament you were supposed to burn whatever was left instead of throwing it away or giving it to dogs or something, right? Because it's supposed to be holy. Are we supposed to do that nowadays too? Because in memorial of Christ, because we're basically symbolizing his body and the drink as his blood. Should we be doing the same?
So when we do it as a group, when we're here for the Lord's Supper, we're pretty, diligent, and we don't use a gallon of juice, right? We use kind of the exact amount, or close to the exact amount that we have, and everybody here knows, that takes a little bit of time. And the same thing with the bread, with the matzah. We don't, bring out 6 loaves, right? It's very, and at the end we're usually left with very little to anything, and what is left, which is just usually some little bit of crumbs or something like that, Mario or I or somebody will eat it, and that would be that. But not usually left over.
Yeah, I know for us, we always have, because of the larger congregation, there's usually leftover as far as whether it be the juice or whether it be of the bread. But because it's blessed, it has to be consumed. All of it has to be consumed.
So the Passover, which, as I said at the beginning, is a basic fundamental, a big building block, big component of the way forward. As Brother Nate said, this is the last Passover before the implementation of the fulfillment of that, spiritually, with what the Lord did that we'll study next Sabbath. Any online comments or anything that we haven't covered yet? No? Okay. All right. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Good conversation, good discussion. We'll take a few-minute break, and then we'll be back for the second part of our service here in 15 or 20 minutes or so. So thank you very much.